joining us right now here on the show to break down the Stanley Cup playoffs. And this is a treat. I've been watching the National Hockey League my entire life. We're about to have on one of like the best defensemen in the history of the National Hockey League. Hockey Hall of Famer, Stanley Cup champion. You watch him on ESPN doing an amazing job pre-game show, in between periods, post-game show, along with our Mark Messier, Rangers legend, Steve Levy, and the rest of the crew on ESPN. And a fellow Greek, so absolutely love it. The great Chris Chelios joins us now. I would give his Twitter handle out, but he's not on Twitter, at least from what I can tell, which instantly makes him the smartest person in the room to not have Twitter. Chris Chelios joins us here on You Better You Bet to break down the Stanley Cup playoffs. Chris, we sincerely appreciate the time. It's Nick Costos, Ken Barkley here. How's it going?
You bet. Really good. Yeah, no Twitter and all about the Greek thing for sure. Yeah.
No Twitter and all about the Greek. That's again, smartest guy in the room. Chris, it seems like the story of the Stanley Cup playoffs a lot is upsets. It seems like they happen more in this competition than in the NBA or other sports. And this year was kind of no different, right? Boston loses, Colorado loses in the first round. I'm curious, like we never have former players on to ask them this question, so you're the perfect person. Like, is there a real tangible difference between like being a good playoff team and a good regular season team? It seems like it based on the upsets. And what do you think that is? What kind of makes the difference between being great in the playoffs and great in the regular season?
Yeah, well, there's so much parity, obviously, in the NHL now with the formula they come up with. Whatever, you get a point for ties and the overtimes, and I mean now basketball. What happened in Milwaukee, right? That doesn't happen a whole lot, but in hockey, what you saw, this has been the most bizarre first round that I've experienced, especially now, being with ESPN and being an analyst. My wife's ahead of me in the pool right now, which I should be very embarrassed about in the hockey pool, but yeah, it's just like. Florida, once you beat that best team, as Florida knocked off Boston, how do you not consider them to be one of the favorites to go get to the finals? So I'm shocked at what's gone on. And, Tampa, I still thought, they still had some life left in them. But a couple teams, again, let it slip. The Rangers were up, 2, going back home, couldn't find a way to win one game to get it to 3. But then you look at Boston, put them up 3-1, and then up Florida, coming back and winning the next 4 or 3. So it's been great, though. It's been the most exciting first round I've ever seen.
It's been awesome. And then the second round off to a pretty good start as well with all the game ones in the books. A couple game 2s tonight and 2 more game 2s coming up on Friday night. Chris, let's start to break down these games and kind of like the series overall and how you see them playing out. So game 2 in Toronto tonight between the Maple Leafs and the Panthers, who you mentioned, and I agree, by the way. I actually think Florida's going to win the Stanley Cup at this point. Would love to see them stick with Sergei Bobrovsky in net. We'll see how things go. Toronto is minus 210, a big favorite tonight against Florida. Panthers at plus 170. Total in the game is 7. The implication, obviously, lots of goals will be scored. Listeners and viewers of our show know I'm on the Florida Panthers here tonight. I bet them in game 1. I will bet them again tonight. How do you see tonight playing out? Game 2, Toronto up against it a little bit, obviously. You don't want to go down 2-0, losing both games at home. How do you see game 2 playing out? And what do you think we see the rest of the series here, Chris, with Florida and Toronto?
Watching game 1, it could have went either way. Bobrovsky stood in his head, and Florida played good. And they tie it back up, and they come back and score to win the game. So they showed some grit there. But, anything, if your goalie steals a game, he steals a game. I don't know if he necessarily stole a game, but he gave him a chance to win, and then Florida came up and scored those last 2 goals. And, I've seen Tampa, when they played Toronto, absolutely shut them down. Toronto had plenty of chances. So by no means, do I think Florida, you bet Florida today, fine, but I think Toronto knows this is a game they have to win. They don't want to go down 2-0 heading back to Florida. That would be the kiss of death. And then, the other series, like I said, you look at Vegas. I thought they just hung on to win that game, but again, to come back and score that goal once Edmonton tied it up showed that they're a team that's they play 4 lines, but again, at the end of the day, I don't think they got outplayed by Edmonton, but for sure Edmonton, their speed, it's going to be tougher for Vegas to keep this pace up for a 7-game series.
Chris, you mentioned just like how unpredictable the playoffs have been, the craziest first round you've ever seen, I think was the way that you put it. And I think, we had a lot of kind of like hockey experts, analysts on the show, people who bet on hockey. And the consensus opinion at the start of the week was the Stars are the team in the West that they liked, at least these people, and that maybe they would dispatch the Kraken. Maybe it wouldn't even take very long. They have a great top line. They have Jake Ottinger. Like, this seems like an easy setup, basically. And then, of course, because it's the most unpredictable Stanley Cup playoffs ever, the Kraken score 5 goals against Jake Ottinger, and they win 5-4 in overtime in Dallas and win Game 1. Game 2 of that series is tonight. Dallas was a really big favorite in Game 1. They're an even bigger favorite tonight to come back and tie the series, about minus 210. One of the bigger favorites that we've seen like the last couple of weeks in the Stanley Cup playoff game. Do you think Dallas evens the series? Do you agree with people that came on the show earlier that maybe Dallas is the team to watch in the West with 4 remaining?
I think they have to. First of all, and Ottinger, he was the difference maker. I think that would be for that series. But again, Seattle knocks off a beat-up Colorado team that really never got going all year and carried over into the playoffs because of the injury bug and guys that they had lost. But that's all part of it too. But Seattle grinds, and they play a solid game, 4 lines, no superstars. Power play is pathetic, which is amazing that they have had the success. They come out from beginning to end. They played a 60-minute game, and they did it, the whole first round. They didn't take one game off. So, I still think Dallas has to come out with a game. Ottinger's going to have to, be solid. Not great, but good. But again, that Seattle team, they're the real deal. What they just play hard. They have pace, and everybody contributes.
Seattle with a 5-4 overtime win in Game 1 against Dallas. Unbelievable, by the way, that 2 teams in the Game 1s had 4 goal scorers and both lost. Dallas with Pavelski in Game 1, and then Leon Draisaitl last night for the Edmonton Oilers as they lose to the Vegas Golden Knights. You bet here with Nick and Ken. Tremendous Thursday, breaking down the Stanley Cup playoffs with the great Chris Chelios, Hockey Hall of Famer, Stanley Cup champion, ESPN, NHL analyst. We will get to Edmonton and Vegas in a second. We'll do Jersey and Carolina here. And for tonight's games, you listen to Chris's answers. Maybe he likes Toronto and Dallas to win tonight. Both big favorites, both down 1-0 in the series, playing Game 2 at home. We were both disappointed, Chris, Ken and I were, in the New Jersey Devils last night. I bet the Devils last night against the Carolina Hurricanes expected their Game 7 performance against the Rangers to kind of carry over, and it did not. Carolina wins the game 5-1. We'll see what the Devils end up doing at goalie. Will they stick with Schmid, go back to Vanacek? We'll see what they end up doing for Game 2. Basically, betting market says it's pretty close to even, like flip a coin. Carolina, the slightest of favorites in Game 2 tomorrow night at home. Total in the game is 5.5, so betting market expecting a lower scoring game with Game 2 with Carolina and Jersey. Do you think the Devils get back in the series? What do you think we see the rest of the way and in Game 2 with the Devils and the Canes?
I think it'll be a long series. I think they'll be better next game. They're coming off that Game 7, the Rangers, pretty high emotions and huge game for them. And Carolina was good. They played well, but Jersey's got a lot more than they showed. That's for sure. And they really didn't do anything similar to what the Rangers did when they didn't show up for Game 7 against the Devils. So I got all the confidence in the world that the Devils are going to be much better tonight. They just, like I said, they're a young team and came off that big Game 7 Rangers, and I think they had a little bit of an effect on them on that first game against Carolina.
Chris, I'm curious. We don't have former players on very often, former players who have gone deep on postseason runs and won titles. We always talk sometimes about things in, when we bet on games, I like this team for that reason, but none of us played. So we don't really know if it's a real thing. We're just kind of guessing. You alluded to the fact that you thought there was a real letdown with the Devils. They play Game 7 against the Rangers. It's an emotional win and they don't play very well. In Game 1 against Carolina, were you a part of teams that either were able to take advantage of teams that were coming off game and you noticed it, that there was an emotional letdown? Have you been a part of a team like that yourself? Is that really a real thing? As someone who played, who's been in locker rooms, can you tell when stuff like that is going on?
Well, there's no question. And I think Carolina took full advantage of the rest that they had, by closing out the Islanders. So, I think it plays a big part. And, like I said, they had a late game. Jersey, they had to travel and play the day after. So I think there's no question that fatigue was a part of it, an emotional part of the winning that game and the expectations. But look, there's a couple non-calls there during that game. The refereeing, has been, I hate to beat up on the refs all the time, but it's been consistently inconsistent. But it's all timing too. That had no that didn't have any bearing on the game, what happened. But like I said, I think Carolina took advantage. They got guys rested. They've, missing, the key guys, the scoring guys. They've been missing, Pacioretty all year. The other kid that got hurt tore his ACL, Svechnikov. That really hurts Carolina because they've had trouble in the past. But again, they're a solid team, and they're well coached, and they play the same way, and they're very disciplined. And when they shut them down, they shut them down. But I still think Jersey's got a lot left, and a lot more to. They play a much better game than they did game one.
Chris, be honest with us. You're amongst friends here. Do you hate to beat up on the officials? Because they've been terrible this postseason.
I don't hate to beat up. It's just like a player. When a player doesn't play well, you call them out. When referees, make mistakes, you call them out. Now, in their defense, everything's happening full speed. We have the luxury of watching replays and backing it up once or twice and getting, that extra thing. But, I'm a big fan of reviewing a lot of the things, and I wish they'd make it easier on the refs to do that. I know they want to slow the game down, but I think in the playoffs you want to get it right. But, again, a referee standing 5 feet away, guy high sticks a guy in the face, and there's no call. The ref's shaking his head. Well, like I said, it hasn't been consistent. That's all I'll say.
You've been very diplomatic. I think they suck. But that was me that said it, not Chris Chelios. Chris, we got about a minute here for Edmonton and Vegas. So Vegas wins game one last night, 1-0 series lead. Edmonton is favored still to win the series, and they're favored to win game number 2 tomorrow night. High total again. Do you think the Oilers get back in this thing coming up on Friday night?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, Draisaitl and McDavid, you put them on the power play, and it's obvious. It's been unreal all year, and then what they've carried it over into the playoffs. I still think I'm watching the game, their speed. Vegas just hanging on. Their goalie played amazing. But I'm going to pick Edmonton for sure on Saturday for game 2. I just think, the pace is going to get to Vegas. But, again, guys like Stone, how they stepped up. And they've been under the injury bug. And, although they don't score a whole bunch. They still manage to play. And Cassidy's a great coach. They play they roll 4 lines, 5-on-5. Like I said, they just play well defensively, and they capitalize on other teams' mistakes. Edmonton will make mistakes, but I still think they're just too fast and too strong.
Chris, we have about 30 seconds to go. You mentioned that your wife is currently leading you in the pool of who you guys are picking to advance in the playoffs. Who does Chris Chelios' wife have winning Lord Stanley's Cup? We have about 20 seconds for the answer.
You know what? Honestly, we're tied. So I picked some teams betting and pools. And said you got to pick an underdog to separate yourselves from the family pack here. So that's where we're at. But let me ask my son, Jake. Whose mom got for the cup? She had Boston, so I think our whole family's out of the cup thing. We all had Boston. So if you want my opinion now, I'm cheering for Florida. Now I don't know if you're allowed to even do that, but
let's do it. I bet on the Panthers, Chris. I bet the Panthers, so I absolutely love it, Chris. We sincerely appreciate it. Love watching you on ESPN. Enjoy the rest of the postseason. We'll talk to you soon here on You Better You Bet.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot.
That's a great greet, Chris Chelios.